The strangest sound in the world is not a scream. It is silence where an engine used to be. One second an airliner is a roaring thing full of noise and heat, and the next it is a glider the size of a building, sinking toward a state full of cornfields with 172 people strapped inside it. That is what happened over eastern Nebraska on a clear October afternoon. The people in the control room had run out of runways to offer. The pilots had run out of checklists, and the only person who knew how to save them was standing in a field in muddy boots, fixing a broken irrigation pump, waiting for a phone to ring that never would. Before we get into it, do me a favor and tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. I read every one, and if stories like this one hit you the way they hit me, the subscribe button is right there. Now let's get to Nebraska. Silverline Airways Flight 4021 left Denver at 1:40 in the afternoon, bound for Chicago, an ordinary Airbus A320 on an ordinary route it had flown 1,000 times. Captain Ray Delgado had been flying commercial aircraft for 22 years. He was the kind of pilot other pilots didn't worry about. Beside him sat First Officer Danny Okonkwo, 29 years old, 3 years on the job, sharp and quick, and still young enough to feel lucky every time the wheels left the ground. The climb was smooth. The coffee was hot. Somewhere behind them, a baby was asleep against its mother's chest. They were level at 21,000 feet, crossing into Nebraska, when the first engine let go. There was no bang. That was the part Ray would keep coming back to for the rest of his life. He expected a failure to announce itself. Instead, the number one engine just started winding down, the way a fan does when you unplug it, the numbers on the display sliding backward toward nothing. He had barely reached for the checklist when the second engine did the same thing. Both of them. Quiet. Dead. The cockpit filled with warning tones. Red text bloomed across the screens. Ray's hands were already moving through the relight procedure, cool and automatic, the way you fall back on the oldest thing you know when the newest thing you know has failed you. Danny was reading the memory items out loud, her voice tight but level. Neither engine answered. They tried again. Nothing came back but the hiss of the air over the fuselage and the small mechanical sounds of an aircraft that had stopped being an aircraft and started being a very heavy thing falling at a shallow angle. What neither of them knew yet, what the investigators would only piece together later, was that a batch of fuel loaded that morning had been contaminated. Both engines had been drinking from the same poisoned well. There was no restart coming. There never had been. Ray keyed the radio. He kept his voice slow on purpose, because a slow voice makes people on the ground listen instead of panic. Denver Center, Silverline 4021. We have lost both engines. I say again, dual engine failure. We are gliding. 172 souls on board. We need vectors to anything you've got. For a moment, the frequency was silent too. Then the controller came back, and even through the radio, you could hear him sit up straighter. The regional control center that handled that patch of sky was a low brick building outside Omaha. On a Tuesday afternoon, it hummed along like a quiet office, a room of screens and soft voices and lukewarm coffee. Then a strip of data on one screen started doing something it should not do. Altitude peeling off, speed decaying. A pilot's voice saying the two words no controller ever wants to hear together. The controller working the sector was a man named Pete. He was good at his job, and being good at his job in that moment meant swallowing the fear rising in his own chest and thinking about geometry. A powerless jet is a falling stone with a little bit of glide left in it. From 21,000 feet, that airplane had a certain number of miles it could travel before it met the ground, and not 1 mile more. His job was to find a runway inside that circle. He pulled up the airports. The nearest field with a runway long enough for a jet was 41 miles away. He ran the glide. The airplane could not make it. Not close. He looked at the next one. Farther still. He looked at a third, a little municipal strip with a runway too short to matter even if they could reach it, which they couldn't. Every option he had was outside the circle. He was being asked to thread a needle with no needle. His supervisor, a heavy-set man named Hank Ostrom, who had worked that room for 30 years, was already standing behind him. Hank had a rule he'd learned the hard way, which was that when the sky handed you an impossible problem, you stopped protecting your ego and started widening your net. He got on the line to the flight and asked Ray how much time he had. Ray had already done the math in his head, the way pilots do, cold and fast. "Best glide, current descent rate," he said. "About 9 minutes. Then we're on the ground somewhere, one way or the other." 9 minutes. Hank looked at the map, at all those neat little squares of farmland stretching out under the falling airplane, and he understood the truth of it. There was no airport. There was only Nebraska. Miles and miles of open ground, and somewhere down there, if they were lucky, a flat place long enough and firm enough to put a jet on without killing everyone aboard. Hank picked up the microphone that broadcast on the regional emergency frequency, the one that any radio in the area could hear, and he did something that was not in any manual. He asked for help. "Any station, any aircraft, any observer on this frequency near the Silver Line flight going down. If you can see this aircraft and you have information that can help, come up now." He did not expect an answer. You never do. He was just casting a line into the dark. 12 miles from the falling airplane, a woman named Della Hartwell was kneeling in the dirt beside a center pivot irrigation rig, cursing quietly at a seized bearing. She was 58 years old. Her hands were rough and streaked with grease, and there was a smear of it across her jaw where she'd wiped away sweat. She wore a canvas jacket gone soft with age and a pair of boots she'd owned longer than some of her neighbors had been married. 620 acres. Alfalfa in the low fields, corn to the north, a cut hay field out west that she'd baled a week ago and that now lay flat and golden and empty in the afternoon sun. The people in the town of Cedar Point knew Della the way you know a good neighbor. She showed up when a barn burned. She drove the church van. She fixed her own machinery and paid her bills on time and did not talk much about herself. What they did not know, because she had never told them, was that the quiet woman with grease on her jaw had once flown some of the most advanced aircraft the United States government owned. Before Cedar Point, before the farm, there had been Della Hartwell, the Air Force test pilot. 11 years at Edwards, out in the high California desert, strapping into experimental airframes that the rest of the world would not see for a decade. Her specialty had been the ugliest problem in flying, the one everyone trained for and nobody wanted. What to do when the power quits and the aircraft becomes a glider. Engine-out testing, dead-stick approaches, bringing broken things down out of the sky using nothing but altitude, airspeed, and the plainest laws of physics. The other pilots had a name for her, half joke and half salute. They called her Dead Stick because she could put a powerless airplane on a chosen spot the way most people set a cup down on a table. After the Air Force, there had been the gliders. She'd gone competitive, flown national soaring championships, spent long silent hours a mile above the earth in an aircraft with no engine at all, reading the invisible rivers of rising air, and she had been very, very good at it. And then, 7 years ago, her husband Sam, who had flown right alongside her for most of her life, had gone down in a small plane on a clear day for reasons the report never fully explained. After that, Della had put flying away. She'd bought her father's old farm, come home to the flat middle of the country, and told herself she was done with the sky. She'd almost believed it. She heard the airplane before she saw it. Not the drone of a crop duster. Not the far-off rumble of a jet at cruise. This was wrong, and the wrongness was that it was too quiet. A big airplane low over her fields, and no engine noise coming off it. She stood up. She shaded her eyes. There it was, the white shape of a jetliner, sinking, both engines dark, the wings level and the nose held just so in the attitude of an aircraft being flown by someone trying very hard to make it last. Della's whole body understood what she was looking at before her mind caught up. 30 years of instinct read the descent, the speed, the angle, and returned a single flat verdict. That airplane was going to be on the ground in a handful of minutes, and there was no airport anywhere near enough to catch it. She was already running for the barn. Inside the barn, on a shelf beside a coil of baling wire, sat an old aviation radio she had never quite been able to throw away. She kept it charged. She kept it there. She had told herself for 7 years that she didn't know why. She switched it on, spun to the emergency frequency, and caught the tail end of a supervisor's voice asking any observer to come up. Della keyed the mic. Her hands were steady, and that steadiness surprised her, the way an old language comes back the moment you need it. Station calling for observers. This is a ground observer 12 miles north of Cedar Point. I have visual on your Silverline aircraft. He is not going to reach any runway. I have a cut hayfield here, level, dry, close to a mile long. I can talk him onto it. But I need to start now. The voice that answered was brisk and not unkind and very much wanted her off the frequency. Ma'am, I appreciate it, but this line has to stay clear for emergency traffic. Please. I'm a former Air Force test pilot, Della said. She said it flatly, the way you state a fact you have no interest in bragging about. 11 years. My specialty was engine-out landings. Call sign Dead Stick. That aircraft has maybe 7 minutes of altitude left, and it's going to come down inside my county. I am the closest thing to a runway you've got. Verify me if you have to, but do it fast. There was a pause, a long one. Della could picture the room, the glances passing between people, the awful arithmetic of whether to trust a voice on a radio with 172 lives. Then a different voice came on, older, slower, the voice of a man who had decided. Ground observer, this is Supervisor Ostrom. Say your name. Della Hartwell. Another beat. She could hear, faintly, someone typing. She kept her eyes on the sky through the open barn door, on the white shape getting lower. Ms. Hartwell, Hank said, and something in his tone had changed, had opened up. I've got a colleague here who used to be Air Force. He says the call sign checks out. He says if Dead Stick is offering you a field, you take the field. A breath. Stand by. I'm patching you to the aircraft. In the cockpit of 4021, Ray Delgado was flying the most important glide of his life and running out of places to put it. He'd been eyeing a stretch of interstate to the south, weighing it against the fields, hating both options. When the controller told him a former test pilot on the ground had a field and wanted to talk him in, he and Danny exchanged one look. A field. No lights. No foam trucks. No runway at all. Just dirt and stubble in a stranger's voice. But the interstate had traffic and light poles and overpasses, and the math on every airport was the same brutal no. Put her on, Ray said. The frequency clicked, and then a woman's voice filled the cockpit, calm in a way that reached into Ray's chest and steadied something there. Silverline 4021, this is Della. I've got eyes on you. I'm going to give you a place to land, and I'm going to walk you all the way down. But I need you to do exactly what I say. When I say it, no arguing and no hesitating. We only get one approach. There's no going around. Can you fly it that way? Ray keyed up. His voice came out rougher than he wanted. Dead Stick? Is that really? The controller said Dead Stick. Later, Captain, Della said, and there was almost warmth in it. Give me your altitude, your speed, and your weight. Then look out your right side and find the biggest gold-colored rectangle you can see. That's my field. That's where you're going. 11,500, Ray said, reading fast. 160 knots. Weight's around 140,000 pounds. Good numbers. You've got enough. Turn right, heading 270. I'm going to line you up to land into the west, and the wind's mostly on your nose out here today, which is exactly what we want. It'll slow you down for free. Ray banked the powerless airplane onto the heading. Far below, a golden rectangle slid into view off the right wing, and it looked, from 2 miles up, impossibly small. Back in the cabin, the passengers of Flight 4021 did not know the woman's name. They only knew the silence and the way the flight attendants' faces had changed. The lead attendant was a woman named Miriam Cho, 20 years in the aisles, and when the engines went quiet, she felt her stomach drop and then felt something older and harder take over. She stood, she braced her voice, and she started working the cabin. She would remember them all afterward, not as a number, as people. In row 9, there was a man named Tomas Reyes, 34, a house painter from Chicago who had flown to Denver for his cousin's wedding and cut the trip short because that morning his wife Elena had called him crying and laughing at once. The baby was coming. 3 weeks early, but coming. He had a photo of the crib on his phone, half assembled in a spare room painted the exact shade of yellow Elena had picked. When the engines died, Tomas did not scream. He held that phone against his chest, and he prayed, in Spanish, the way his grandmother had taught him, and he made a promise to a child who did not have a name yet. Across the aisle sat an old man named Walter Beaumont, 73, a retired music teacher who had spent 40 years putting instruments into the hands of kids who couldn't afford them. On his lap, held with both hands, was a small wooden box. Inside the box were the ashes of his wife Adele, gone 8 months now. He was carrying her home to a lake in Wisconsin where they had met at a summer band camp in 1971, where he had been too shy to speak to her until she'd walked over and asked him why he played the trumpet like he was apologizing for it. He had planned to scatter her there at sunset. When the airplane went quiet, Walter looked down at the box and said very softly that it looked like he might be seeing her sooner than planned, and he was surprised to find the thought didn't frighten him. 2 rows back sat a 16-year-old named Keziah, flying alone to visit her father, headphones around her neck, trying to look braver than she felt. Beside her was a large man in a business suit who had gone completely white and was gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles had lost their color. Keziah didn't know him, but she could see he was falling apart, and something in her decided she wasn't going to watch it happen and do nothing. She reached over and put her hand on his forearm. "Hey," she said. "Hey. Breathe with me. In. Out. My name's Keziah. What's yours?" And the man, a stranger, a grown man 3 times her age, held onto a teenager's hand like it was the last solid thing in the world. Miriam moved down the aisle checking belts, guiding people into the brace position, keeping her voice even and low. "Heads down, stay down. You're going to feel a hard landing. That's normal. We are getting you down, and we are getting you out." She did not know if it was true. She said it like it was, because that was the job, and because saying it made it a little more true for everyone who heard her. "Altitude 9,000, Ray reported. "Fields in sight. It looks awful small, Della." "It's bigger than it looks, and it's longer than you need," Della said. She was walking now, out of the barn and into the open, her eyes locked on the airplane, building the whole landing in her head the way she used to build them at Edwards, every variable a number, every number in its place. She knew this field the way she knew her own hands. She knew the hard-packed strip down the center where the ground was firmest after bailing. She knew the soft, low corner near the creek to keep him away from. She knew that the west end rose in a gentle grade, no more than a few degrees, so slight you'd never notice driving across it, and she knew that a slight uphill at the end of a landing roll is a gift, because gravity itself starts helping you stop. She also knew the hazards, and there were 3 of them. Listen close, Captain, because these will kill you if you get them wrong. 1. There's a windbreak of tall cottonwoods along the east edge of my field, where you're coming in. They're 60 feet if they're an inch. You need to clear those trees with real room to spare. So I need you to stay high on the approach, high, higher than your instincts will like. Don't dive for the field. Come in over those trees fat and slow, and I'll tell you exactly when to let it down. Copy. Stay high. Cross the trees. Wait for your call. 2. Along the south fence line, there's a county road with power poles and lines strung along it. You keep your wings north of center. Do not drift south. Those wires don't show up until you're right on them. North of center. Copy. 3. And this is the one nobody expects. There's a center pivot irrigation rig parked out in the middle of the field. Big metal thing, half a football field long. It's sitting in the north third. I'm going to bring you down the south center strip to keep you well clear of it. But that means your margin on the power lines is tighter, so you fly the line I give you and not 1 foot off it. You understand me? Ray understood. He read it all back. Beside him, Danny had her hands hovering, calling out altitudes and speeds in a steady rhythm, and somewhere under her fear she felt a strange clarity, the sense of being part of something that mattered more than anything she'd ever done. Altitude 7,000, speed 158. Perfect speed, hold it right there. That's your best glide, that's your lifeline. Don't let it bleed off and don't let it build. Della's voice never rose. At 6,000, I want you to start setting up. Flaps to the first setting, gear stays up for now. We want you clean and slow, and I'll tell you when to dirty up. From here it's just a long, patient descent, Captain. You've got the airplane, I've got the field. 6,000 feet. The first stage of flaps groaned out. 5,000. The golden rectangle was no longer a distant shape, but a real place, growing, resolving into cut hay and fence lines and a glint of metal that was the irrigation rig. Ray could see the cottonwoods now, dark and tall along the near edge, exactly where she'd said they'd be. 4,000, Danny called. 158, holding. You're flying it beautifully, Captain, Della said. Now, I need something from you, and it's going to sound strange. I need you to keep breathing slow. Your body's going to want to rush the last part. Every instinct is going to scream, get it down, get it down. Don't. The airplane will tell you when it's ready. Trust the numbers, not the fear. How are you this calm? Ray asked. The words came out before he could stop them. There was the smallest pause on the frequency. When Della answered, something underneath the calm showed through, just for a second, the weight of the years behind it. I'm not calm, she said. I'm terrified. My hands are shaking down here. But scared and calm aren't opposites, Captain. Scared just means you understand the stakes. Calm is what you do about it. You can carry both at the same time. You're doing it right now. A beat. Now bring your gear down. Landing gear down. You'll feel the drag pick up and the nose want to drop. Ride it, don't fight it. The gear thumped into the airstream. The airplane shuddered and slowed and settled deeper into its descent. In the cabin, the change in sound and feel rippled through the passengers, and Miriam called out, "Here we go, heads down, stay down." And 172 people bent themselves toward their knees and held on. 3,000, Danny said. Tree line coming up. There it is, Della said. Now stay high, Captain, high. Let me see you clear those cottonwoods. She was watching through an old pair of field glasses, the airplane huge in the lenses now, close enough that she could see the streaks on the belly, the set of the flaps, the wheels reaching down like something being born. You're going to make those trees with plenty of room. Steady, steady. The jet crossed the cottonwoods with 40 feet to spare. Della let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Trees are behind you. Now, flaps full, all of it. This is the landing, Captain. Everything up to now was getting here. When I say flare, you bring the nose up smooth and gentle, not a yank, a lift. You want your main wheels to kiss first. Wait for it. Wait, wait. The airplane came down the south center strip exactly on the line she'd drawn for it, wings level, north of the wires, the great metal spider of the irrigation rig sliding past off the right wing with room between them. 50 feet. 30. The stubble rushed up gold and blurred. Flare, Della said. Now, nose up, easy. Ray raised the nose. For 2 long seconds the airplane floated, caught in that strange cushion of air that builds between a wing and the ground, refusing to land, wanting to fly a little longer. And then there was no more lift left in the world to hold it, and 140,000 pounds of aircraft came home. The main wheels hit the earth with a shock that went through every seat in the airplane. It bounced, hard, came down again, and then the field had it. The tires bit into the hay stubble and the soft dirt beneath, and the whole aircraft began to shudder and roar as it tore across the ground at over 130 miles an hour, throwing up a wall of dust and chaff and shredded stalks behind it. Inside the cabin, it was chaos, a bone-deep grinding thunder. Overhead bins bursting, loose bags flying, people screaming into the roar. Miriam had her head down and her hands braced, and she was shouting, "Stay down, stay down, stay down," into the noise. Out in the field, Della was running, sprinting alongside the airplane's path, screaming into the radio, though there was nothing more the pilots could do but what she'd already told them. "Brakes! Everything you've got. Stand on them. Straight ahead. Keep it straight." Ray was on the brakes with both feet, the airplane fighting him, wanting to slew, and he held it straight down the strip through sheer will. The stubble dragged at the wheels. The dust swallowed everything. Della watched the markers she'd laid in her mind flash past. A quarter of the field gone. Half. The metal rig safely behind them now. And ahead, at the far end, the western tree line coming up, and beyond it, the creek. Then the airplane reached the grade. That gentle rise at the west end, the few degrees of slope so slight no one would ever notice it, took hold of 140,000 pounds of moving metal and began, at last, to win. The nose tipped up into the hill. The brakes bit harder against the pull of gravity. The airplane slowed, and the tree line that had been rushing toward them steadied and stopped rushing. The A320 came to rest 160 feet from the cottonwoods at the west edge of Della Hartwell's hayfield. The dust drifted forward over the wings and hung in the golden light. And then it was quiet again. But it was a different quiet now. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the emergency slides deployed with a series of soft explosions, blooming yellow against the field, and the doors were open and people were coming out. Della stood in the middle of her field, chest heaving, and she counted. She could not help it. She counted every single one. They came down the slides and tumbled into the hay and lay there, or got up and ran, or simply sat down where they landed and stared at the sky. 10, 30. 60. A young man came down clutching a phone. An old man came down holding a small wooden box against his chest with both arms. A teenage girl came down still gripping the hand of a large man in a rumpled suit. A mother came down with a baby, held tight to her body, and the baby, incredibly, was still asleep. 100. 130. 170. Captain Ray Delgado was the last one off, after he had walked the length of the cabin twice to be sure it was empty. He came down the slide and stood in the field on legs that would barely hold him. His shirt was soaked through. His hands would not stop shaking. He looked around at the impossible sight of it, an airliner sitting whole and quiet in a hayfield with everyone who had been inside it standing alive on the ground around it, and then he saw the woman in the canvas jacket walking toward him. He met her halfway. For a moment neither of them said anything. "Dead stick," Ray finally managed. "Della Hartwell," she said. "I'm a farmer." He looked at the airplane. He looked at the people. He looked back at her, at the grease still on her jaw, and the field glasses hanging around her neck. "You just talked a jetliner onto a hayfield," he said. "You flew it," Della said. "I just handed you the numbers. The hands on the airplane were yours." Ray shook his head slowly. "When the controller said your call sign," he said, "something in me let go of the idea that we were going to die. I don't know how to explain it. I heard dead stick, and I believed there was a way down. I flew the whole approach on that belief." His voice cracked. Everybody walked away. "Yes," Della said quietly. They did. They came to her one at a time, across the field, in the long gold light of the afternoon. Tomas Reyes reached her first, and he could not speak at all for a moment. He just held up his phone with the photo of the half-painted nursery. "My wife's having our baby tonight," he finally said, and the tears came all at once. "A girl. We didn't have a name yet." He wiped his face with the back of his hand and laughed, wet and shaking. "I think maybe we do now. I think maybe her middle name is going to be after a field in Nebraska." Walter Beaumont came next, the old music teacher, the wooden box still held against his chest. He looked at Della for a long time before he spoke. "My wife's in here," he said, lifting the box a little. "I'm taking her home to a lake in Wisconsin. 60 years ago, she walked up to me and told me I was playing the trumpet wrong." His eyes were bright. "When the engine stopped, I thought I was going to see her tonight. I'd made my peace with it." He reached out and took Della's greasy hand in both of his own. "It turns out I get to keep my promise to her instead. I get to take her home the right way. That's you. That's what you gave me." Keziah came with the large man still beside her, steadier now, though he hadn't quite let go of the idea of staying close to the 16-year-old who'd talked him through the worst minutes of his life. Keziah didn't say much. She just looked at Della with something like recognition. One person who'd refused to freeze looking at another. "You didn't panic," she said. "Neither did you," Della said. "I saw you come down that slide holding on to him. That was you, not me." The girl thought about that. "Nothing you learn is wasted," she said half to herself, and Della felt the words land somewhere deep. The investigators arrived within the hour, and then in a flood, cars and trucks bouncing up the field road, people with cameras and clipboards, and the particular grim focus of those whose job is to understand exactly how something almost went terribly wrong. The lead investigator was a woman named Dana Ruiz, 20 years with the safety board, and she sat with Della at a folding table someone had set up in the field and asked her questions as the light went orange and then red. Della answered everyone plainly. She walked Ruiz through the whole thing, the descent rate, the glide speed she'd held them to, the line she'd drawn to thread between the irrigation rig and the power lines, the grade at the west end she'd counted on to help them stop. Ruiz stopped writing. She looked up. "Say that last part again." "The grade." "The west end rises a few degrees," Della said. "Almost nothing. You'd never feel it. But at that weight and that speed, a slight uphill adds a real amount of braking force. I've bailed that field for years. I knew it was there. I chose this field over a flatter one on the other side of the county because of that slope. It bought them maybe 200 feet of stopping distance. That's the difference between where the airplane is sitting now and the tree line." Ruiz set down her pen entirely. "You calculated the braking benefit of a 3-degree grade," she said slowly, "in your head, in real time, while you were talking a distressed flight crew down a glide path with no engines." "It's what the training was for," Della said. "You spend 11 years learning to bring dead airplanes down onto exact spots. It doesn't leave you. You just stop using it until the day you can't." Ruiz was quiet for a moment. She had investigated a great many accidents. She had almost never investigated one where everyone lived. "In all my years," she said, "I have never seen a powerless commercial jet put down on an unprepared field with every soul aboard, walking away. Not once. It isn't supposed to be survivable." She looked at the woman across the table, at the canvas jacket and the tired eyes. "How long have you been off flying, Ms. Hartwell?" 7 years, Della said. Ruiz shook her head. "It didn't show," she said. That evening, after the field emptied and the airplane sat dark and quiet under the stars, Della walked back out alone to the middle of her field. She stood where the airplane had passed over her, where 172 people had been falling out of the sky 1 hour of her life ago, and she looked up at the same stars she and Sam used to name from the cockpit of a glider a mile above the earth. She had told herself for 7 years that she was done, that when Sam went into the ground, the sky went with him, and she was just a farmer now, and that was all she wanted to be. She had believed it right up until the moment a white shape came over her fields with dead engines, and every piece of the person she used to be woke up at once and knew exactly what to do. She thought she understood something now that she hadn't before. You don't leave behind who you are. You just set it down for a while and carry it differently, and you don't always get to choose the day you have to pick it back up. She had spent 7 years thinking her training had died with her husband. It turned out it had just been waiting, quiet and patient, for the day the world needed it again. Her phone rang in her pocket, a number she hadn't seen in years. When she answered it, a man's voice came through, rough with feeling. "Dead stick," he said. It was Webb Castellano, who had flown on her wing at Edwards a lifetime ago, retired a full colonel now. "It's all over the news. 172 people. They're saying a farmer did it." He laughed, and it broke a little. "I told 'em. I said, that's no farmer. That's the best stick I ever flew next to." A pause. "We never forgot you, Della. Not one of us. I just wanted you to know that." She couldn't answer for a moment. When she did, her voice was thick. "I'm a farmer now, Webb." "Sure," he said gently. "A farmer who caught a jet in her backyard. We're all still proud as hell of you. That never stopped." 2 weeks later, they came for her. It was late morning, and Della was out repairing a fence along the north line when she heard it. Not the roar of jets, something quieter, and somehow that made her look up faster. A formation of sailplanes, long white gliders with slender wings, sweeping in low over her farm in perfect silence. 6 of them, holding a formation tight as a fist, riding the same invisible air she had spent so many years learning to read. They were her people. A soaring club and a few old friends from the competitive circuit, pilots who understood better than anyone what it means to bring an aircraft down with no engine at all. And they had chosen the only kind of flyover that fit, an engine-out salute for an engine-out landing, silent aircraft honoring silent flight. As they passed over the hayfield, over the exact spot where the airliner had come to rest, all 6 gliders rocked their wings, left and right in unison, the oldest gesture pilots have for one of their own. And then the lead glider peeled up and away from the formation, climbing on nothing but the rising air, leaving a gap in the line where an aircraft should be. The missing man, but flown this time, not for someone lost. Flown for someone who had come back. Della stood in her field with her hand raised against the sky, and she let herself cry. She hadn't cried when the airplane stopped. She hadn't cried when the passengers thanked her. She'd held it all together through every minute of it. But 6 silent white wings, dipping over her hayfield, reached in and undid something she'd kept locked away for 7 years, and she stood there in the sun and let it go at last. A month after that, Della drove into Cedar Point and stood in front of a middle school classroom because a teacher had written and asked her to, and because she kept thinking about a 16-year-old girl who'd held a stranger's hand on a falling airplane. She told the kids the story the way she told everything, plainly, without dressing it up. And when a girl in the second row asked her whether she'd been scared, Della gave the same answer she'd given the captain. "The whole time," she said. "Scared and calm at once. They're not opposites. Fear just means you know what's at stake. Calm is what you decide to do with the fear." A boy near the back raised his hand. He wanted to know why she did it, why she picked up the radio at all. She had a quiet life, he said. She could have let the professionals handle it. Della thought about that for a moment. "I was the professional," she said. "I just happened to be wearing farm boots that day. That's the thing I want you to take out of here. Whatever you learn, whatever you're good at, it doesn't care what clothes you've got on when the moment comes. It doesn't check your job title. If you've got something in your hands that can help a person and you decide not to use it, you're the one who has to carry that decision afterward." She looked around the room. "So learn things. Learn everything you can. You won't know for years which thing you learned is the one that'll matter. but someday one of them will, and on that day you'll be glad you paid attention. Tomas Reyes named his daughter that night in a hospital in Chicago. Della, after the field. She's learning to walk now, in a nursery painted the exact shade of yellow her mother picked, and one day her father is going to tell her how she got her middle name, and she isn't going to believe him. Walter Beaumont took his wife home to Wisconsin the following spring. He scattered Adele's ashes at sunset on the lake, where a shy trumpet player once got told he was doing it wrong, and he stood there a long time after, and he said out loud that he'd nearly beaten her there. But a woman in Nebraska had other ideas. Keziah kept in touch with the man from the seat beside her. He sends her a message every year on the anniversary. 3 words. Still breathing. Thanks. She's studying to be a paramedic now. She says she found out something about herself on that airplane that she wants to build a life around. And Della Hartwell went back to her farm, back to the seized bearing on the irrigation pump she'd never actually finished fixing, back to the ordinary work of ordinary days. The tracks from the landing grew over. By the next summer, you couldn't tell anything had ever happened out there. It was just a field again, flat and gold and quiet. But she kept the old radio on the shelf in the barn, charged, tuned to the emergency frequency, humming its low static into the dark. She'd told herself for 7 years that she didn't know why she kept it. She knew now. She was just a farmer, until the day she wasn't. And she would be ready, if that day ever came again, to be both.